Welcome back to episode 2 of our online class on building and using a corporate sponsorship sales system. I'm Rick Jones, the captain of FishBait Marketing. I'm also a managing partner at Engagement. In episode 1, we really set the stage for preparing for the system. We talked a lot about what it takes to be successful in selling sponsorships. Now you got to be asking yourself, Rick, why are you doing this? Well, there are really 3 reasons. Number 1, I do like to teach, and I feel that I can bring value to your career. In episode 1, I talked about the successes that I've had. I've had the ability to sell or buy or activate over $1 billion worth of sponsorships. And so I'd like to bring some of that wisdom to you as you're home, sitting, through this coronavirus crisis and trying to get better. But secondly, I want to compete only against great salespeople, because all boats rise with the tide. If you're a great salesperson, you're going to elevate our industry. See, here's what happens. When people go out and sell a bad sponsorship or do a sponsorship badly, then key people say sponsorship didn't work. Well, nobody ever says advertising doesn't work. They'll just go fire their ad agency. But a lot of times they'll say, we tried corporate sponsorship and it just didn't work. Bad sponsorship salespeople hurt the good ones. But finally, and thirdly and selfishly, you may say, hey, this guy's pretty smart, and let's get him in here and hire him to help us, and then I'll get paid. If you did watch episode 1, we talked a lot about change. And I want to let you know this. Change is hard. Nobody likes change, but we're going to have to change. We're going to come out of this coronavirus crisis at some point, but I really don't know what normal is going to look like. But I do know this. We're not going back to the old normal. There'll be a new normal. I just don't know what it's going to be. But I do know this. We are going to come out of this and be successful. Now, I don't want you to think that everything I've learned about this has come from success, because while I've had a lot of success, I've had a lot more failures. In fact, I've gotten my ass kicked many, many, many times, and will continue to do so. Well, here's the truth. You don't learn from success. You learn from failure. I have been and will be where you are today. I know if this were easy, everybody would be doing it. Again, we talked about how hard it is to get people to give you money. I've been there, and I'm going to try to help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made through my failures. Now, we talked in episode 1 about the 3 G's, the idea of grit plus grind equals greatness. Well, let me talk a minute about the 3 L's, okay? Losses plus learnings equal lessons. And you're going to learn a lot more from your losses. You're going to have better lessons. And I'm going to try to explain some of those to you as we go along. So let's get started now here in episode 2 with the meat and potatoes part of what we're doing. I'm going to walk you through all 12 steps of our FishBait sales process, and then we're going to break them down later one by one. Step number 1 is what we call the philosophy and foundation of sponsorship, also known as the balance of the Trinity ecosystem. The Trinity is a triangle, an equal triangle. The sponsor, the property, and the fan. And they equally have to be treated correctly. Step number 2 is the architecture. What does the property have to bring to both the fan and to the sponsor? Step number 3 is the fit. What sponsors from a 30,000-foot point of view can say, I think we ought to be considering that particular property. Step number 4 is getting very specific with the targeting of those prospects. Step number 5 is the really fun part. It's the art part of our business. It's called engineering. It's bringing the right idea to the right sponsor. Step number 6 is about qualifying. Some people don't have the money or don't have the timing to do this, and so you've got to qualify. Step number 7 is developing the proposal, a custom proposal for each prospect. Step number 8 is creating and actually doing the presentation. We'll talk a lot about that. Step number 9 is maybe the most underutilized part of the 12 steps, and that's the courtship. That's the dating part. I always like to ask people, how many of you married your spouse after the first date? Very few of you, unless maybe you were in Vegas. But you got to date, and you got to date sponsors too. Step number 10 is the marriage. That's the contractual piece of this. Step number 11 is jointly developing the activation plan for the sponsor. And then the final step, step number 12, is implementation and servicing. So let's go back to the beginning and start with step number 1, which is the building foundation, the philosophical foundation of corporate sponsorship. You got to get this one right. When you build a skyscraper, you got to put the footings in the ground. When you build a house, you got to put the foundation in. This is the foundation. If you don't get the foundation right, you're going to fail the rest of the way. And so we're going to spend all of the rest of episode 2 talking about this step and half of episode 3 finishing up this step. I call this the ecosystem model. Ecosystems exist in balance. Outside of my backyard is a salt marsh. I live on an island off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. Here's what I know about the salt marsh. It has to exist in balance. It needs the right amount of fresh water and salt water. It needs the right water temperature at different times during the year to thrive. It needs the right nutrients that come in and out with the tides. Without balance, that ecosystem, as well as any ecosystem, will fail and die. Same thing with sponsorships. There is an ecosystem in sponsorships, and it must exist in balance for the 3 entities involved. First of all, for the property, the rights holder. Secondly, for the corporate sponsor or sponsors. And thirdly, for the fans, the consumers, the constituents. Because it's based on this realization that the only reason that a sponsor will buy your property, will get into a relationship with you, is to reach the children, to reach the offspring, to reach the fans of that property. Because here's what I know. Fans pay for everything. I don't care whether you're in sport or arts or entertainment or museums or zoos or conventions. Fans pay for everything. Without fans, there are no ticket sales. There's no concessions. There's no parking revenue. There's no merchandise sales. Without fans, there are no television rights fees. If nobody's watching, there are no rights fees. And finally, without fans, there are no corporate sponsors. So let's break down the 3 elements of the triangle. The first element is the property. The property exists to promote itself, to be self-sustaining, and to achieve its objectives. If you're a music festival, you exist to recreate that festival every year, to create a profit to add more elements to that music festival every year, and to find more ways to serve your fans every year. And so to do that, they solicit corporate sponsors to provide resources for those. Usually those resources are called cash, but sometimes they're also trade of goods and value in kind. It could also be trading for competencies. You might do a trade with an advertising agency that helps you promote your event. The property has to serve the needs of their sponsors, and they also have to serve the needs of the fans that attend that event. The second point on the triangle is the sponsor. What does the sponsor do? They provide the funding and other resources to the property so the property can reach its business objectives and provide assets to fans. What does the property get? They gain branding and relevant access to fans. They have the ability to differentiate their brand with their competitors, and they also have the ability to tell their brand story in a unique way. We're going to talk a lot about storytelling over the next few episodes. Here's the critical element, and I'm going to repeat it a whole bunch to you till it sticks. The sponsor must create a relevant value, added value component to the fans, and they must get the credit by the fans providing this value. But they also, the sponsor, it can't all be about them, and it can't be all about the fan. They also got to need to know what the property's needs and desires are in order to maintain balance. And finally, the third part of the triangle are the fans. Here's a question you got to ask yourself. Are both your property and your sponsors serving the needs of the fans and bringing added value? So in order to do that, I'm going to say this to you. And this is goal right here. You got to move away from selling sponsorship assets to selling sponsorship services to fans. Okay? Move from assets to selling sponsorship services to fans. Because again, fans are the most important constituent to both the property and to the sponsor. And without doing this, there will be no balance. In a balanced ecosystem in sponsorship, you must have a full and complete understanding of the needs, desires, assets, and elements of your property, of the needs, desires, and objectives of your sponsor, and of the needs and desires of your fans. And in order to do that, you've got to identify the value proposition for each and all of these. I'm going to give you an example. At Engagement, we work for a lot of universities. And one university that we're working with, and I can tell you who it is, I love their athletic director. I have great respect for him. He's been one of the great leaders in intercollegiate athletics. But when we dove into their business plan, we found that none of their objectives mentioned fans. None. They mentioned all the things they want to do for student athletes, and appropriately, that's what they exist to do. But they never mentioned the fan. The fan, they're the bank. They're the banker. If you're going to succeed as a property, you must, absolutely must, focus on fans. So let's focus on the audience, your fans. With your property, what kind of fans do you reach? Who are your fans? So you got to identify the who. Who are the customers? Who are your fans? Who are your attendees? In a college, who are your donors? Who are your students? Who are your student athletes? Who are your alumni? Who are your coaches? Who are the teachers and professors? Who are the parents? All these are what we call constituencies. And you need to know something about each one of these constituencies. And then you've got to decide, how are you going to market to these constituents? Now, here's my definition of marketing. Marketing is nothing more but nothing less than creating and maintaining consumer demand for goods and services. Let me repeat that. Marketing is creating and maintaining consumer demand for goods and services. So what is event marketing? Well, event marketing is creating fan constituent demand for your property and your assets. It's creating sponsor demand for your properties and assets. And finally, it is creating fan constituent demand for your sponsors' products and services. And when you do that, you're going to be successful. Now, sales is relatively easy if the demand is there, because sales is only fulfilling demand. And so creating demand is the most important element in the sales process. Now, let me give you my definition of corporate sponsorship. Corporate sponsorship is a cash or in-kind fee paid to a property. Now, that property could be in sports or arts or entertainment or trade associations, conventions, and other meetings. It could be education or charities or causes. And so they pay this fee in return for the exploitable commercial potential associated with that property. Corporations want to reach the constituents that are involved with, maybe more importantly, are passionate about that property or event. The consumers, those that attend, the participants or the fans, they want, again, corporations to provide value to their experience and to support their passion and experience with the event. The rationale for sponsorship is simply this. It's a unique form of third-party endorsement. In its simplest form, the consumer likes the event, the brand sponsors the event, and therefore the consumer likes the brand. It converts the consumer perception by associating the targeted consumer with the brand through the psychology of what we call joint participation. Roll Tide. And the greatest example of that is licensed merchandise. When I wear Alabama merchandise, I'm part of that tribe. I am endorsing that particular property. Now, I had a boss named Chuck Jarvie, who is the most brilliant marketer I ever knew. And Chuck had the best definition I ever heard of an affinity group. He said an affinity group is a group that will suspend rational behavior in pursuit of their passions. That sounds like a fan. And these are the groups that sponsors absolutely covet. So what is the end result again? Events reach affinity group consumers in their tribes. The consumer feels gratitude towards the sponsor. The consumer supports the brand as they thank you. And that initial support subsequently builds both brand preference and brand loyalty. In other words, sponsorship brings brands to life. If a brand is the promise of the performance of the product or service in the mind of the consumer, then sponsorship can bring that brand promise to life, unlike any other form of marketing discipline. Because sponsorship brings the right audience at the right time with the right activation. But here's the dilemma again. The sponsor must, I repeat this, must bring a compelling added value component to the targeted consumer in conjunction with that consumer's participation with the event, and most importantly, must get the credit by the sponsor for bringing or enhancing that experience. If you don't do that, you're going to fail and you will have wasted your money. So you must find that component. So that's what you have to understand about a property's fans. But next, you have to understand everything about the corporate sponsor. And that's where we'll begin in episode 3. So here's your assignment coming out of episode 2. I want you to take a piece of paper and I want you to write down all of the fans your property reaches. I want you to be very specific in describing these fans. What is their sex, their ages, their demographics, their psychographics, their personas. You have to understand your fans before you can continue with the 12 steps. We'll see you soon in episode 3.